Moses said, Lord, I'm just not a good talker. And God said, I'm not going to let you off that easily, Moses. If you feel that you cannot express yourself well, what about your older brother Aaron? He's a good speaker. He will speak on your behalf. And so it was that for the most part, Moses did not speak with Pharaoh. It was his brother Aaron who did all the speaking. So you don't need to be a great speaker. What about that third quality, the obedience to the cause, the idea that this person is going to do whatever God tells them and is going to lead with strict obedience all the time? And Moses was not like that. Again and again, Moses failed to do the things that God told him to do. You know that God told Moses to go before Pharaoh and pronounce to him all of the plagues that were going to come upon Egypt. Moses wouldn't do it. For the first 3 plagues, it was Aaron who stood up and made the proclamations before Egypt. It was because Moses really did not have the conviction to go forward and do it. It wasn't until he saw Aaron doing it and saw that the plagues did come, that at the time for the 4th plague, then finally Moses said, oh, all right, I guess I'll join in with this now. There are other great stories of Moses' disobedience before God. One of them is a little thing that we always miss. We all know the story about how when the people came to the place in the desert and there was no water to drink, and after a conversation with God, Moses took the people to a rock and he struck the rock with his staff and the water poured out. And we think that was a great victory. But it wasn't. That was a day of failure for Moses. That was the day when God decided that Moses would never enter the promised land. And you think, what happened? Why would God do that to Moses after he has struck the rock with his staff and given water to the thirsty people? Well, because Moses was disobedient. In Numbers 23, when Moses went before God to talk about the thirsty people, God said to him, Moses, you're going to go to this place in the desert where there is a rock face. Take the people with you and talk to the rock. And when you talk to the rock will break open and water will come forth, and the people will know that I have saved them. God told Moses to talk to the rock. He didn't tell him to strike it with his staff. But when Moses went to that place, he disobeyed God, and in frustration and anger, he lifted up the staff and he struck the rock, and that's when the water came out. And God said to him, Moses, I told you to speak to the rock. But now, by your striking the rock to the staff, you have made it look as if you saved the people. These people need to know that it is not human power, but God's power that will save them. And for that disobedience, Moses, you will never enter my promised land. Moses didn't always get it right. He sometimes acted in human frustration or anger and made a mess of things. And what about courage? We think that great leaders have to be courageous, but was Moses always courageous? We read this morning of that miraculous event where God told him to throw his staff upon the ground, and the staff turned into a snake. And it's a wonderfully miraculous story, except for the last little bit that we sometimes overlook. When Moses saw the snake, what did he do? He ran away in fear. A man who has lived in the desert for 40 years and he's still afraid of snakes. And when God told Moses to go before Pharaoh with that staff, do you remember what happened? Was it Moses who carried that staff and threw it on the ground? No. He said, Aaron, I don't really like this staff. You take it and you throw it on the ground. And it was Aaron who threw the staff down. Moses was frightened of it. And in case any of you are thinking, well then, I guess that Aaron should have been the leader of the people. He had the qualities. He was the speaker. He was the strong and courageous one. Aaron was a great leader. Well, wait a minute. Aaron wasn't so great either. Do you remember what happened when Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments? What did the great Aaron do? He called the people together. He gathered up their gold rings and jewelry, and he melted them down and formed them into a golden calf for the people to worship. Not much of a leader there either. And does a great leader have to be extroverted? Do you think that Moses was an extrovert? Have you forgotten what he was doing for the last 40 years? He's been a shepherd. He has run away from his problems. He has run away from his people. He has run away from his responsibilities. And he didn't just run away to take a vacation for 3 weeks. When Moses ran away, he ran away for 40 years. And he spent his whole working life as a shepherd, spending days on end by himself. And he wouldn't have done that unless he liked it. Moses was no extrovert. Moses would rather have stayed out on the hillsides and in the desert completely by himself, days on end. So what is a leader? Why would God call unto himself a person who firstly had no desire to be a leader, was a poor speaker, was disobedient, was filled with fear, and was introverted to a point where he had no use for being around people at all? Why did God do that? Well, it's a funny thing with God when God calls leaders. God does the strangest thing in choosing leaders for his people. He chooses the weak. He chooses the broken. He calls forward those whom the world would say are hopeless. When the people of Israel called out to Samuel saying, "We want to have a king," Samuel and God both answered them, "You don't need a king, you have God." But they continued saying, "Give us a king."